Hey, what's up, everyone? Hope you are well. I wanted to quickly introduce this conversation I had with Shari and Nate. It's part 3 of our series on Douglas Harding's The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. And even if you haven't read the book or have watched the other installments of the series, I encourage you to watch this conversation, as it is one of the favorite conversations that I've ever had with two wonderful people. We went really deep into some ideas of Christianity, the Trinity, kind of reality, the hierarchy. We were kind of at the edge of our ability to comprehend things, and it felt really beautiful to me. And I feel that you guys will really appreciate it and enjoy it as well. And please leave some comments and some feedback after you watch it, as we went into kind of a lot of deep territory that really, I feel, turned out really wonderful, and very appreciative of this conversation. So I want to thank Shari and Nate for joining me in this kind of experience of Dialogos. So hope you guys like it. Let me know. And here is part 3 of my discussion with Nate and Shari on Douglas Harding's The Hierarchies of Heaven and Earth. Thanks. God bless.
Hey, James and Sherry, here we are. This is like part 3 of our ongoing discussion of hierarchy of heaven and earth. We focus on chapters 9 through 12 this time, and we kind of like we're all talking beforehand and kind of agreed that the important bit here was kind of toward the end of chapter 12. And James, I'm going to go ahead and have you go ahead and read that little end part of chapter 12 so that we can kind of frame the conversation.
You want me to read from where it says the evidence of mysticism, or where it just starts a note on some aspects of Christian doctrine from the point of view of this
You can
inquiry?
start wherever you feel like.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind hearing that. I haven't read that yet, James. So
Okay, yeah, I'll start at 13 here. So it says, if the mystic's progress is hierarchical and his goal is in any sense a sharing in the divine, then we may look to his account of that goal for light upon the divine nature. And his report is that his outward journey through zones of light and darkness ends not in the longed for beatific vision, but in the darkest night of his soul. His quest has failed. He is thrust back to the very beginning. Instead of the enjoyment of God, a virtual atheism, instead of the whole, the center. And this state of utter emptiness is the condition of the final phase of union, when having ceased to be interested in his own spiritual welfare, he is content to be nothing for the sake of the divine object. Now he returns to serve self-forgetfully all creatures and to demonstrate to us that the divine is not other than this commonplace world seen in its full hierarchical setting. Thus, the mystic's experience offers empirical confirmation that the most exalted level is also the lowest, and the entire hierarchy. And he witnesses not only to the union of these 3 main hierarchical aspects or stages, but also to the union of the 3 main ways that link them: the way of thought and devotion to the true, of works and devotion to the good, of art and devotion to the beautiful. For while each of us is naturally fitted for one or another of these 3 approaches, which may be called the cognitive, the conative, and the affective, there is much to show that none of us can go very far along any of them by itself. Truth without goodness or beauty leads to the H-bomb and the industrial slum. Goodness without truth or beauty to the faggot and the rack, the tin tabernacle and the plaster image. Beauty without goodness or truth to the matter kind of surrealism. Every value is devalued without the others. The great mystic, it would seem, has come to the place where all 3 roads join. He has in some degree overcome the trifurcation of the values and glimpsed a realm where the true and the good are no longer hopelessly discrepant, and both altogether lovely. And once more, if we are to believe his story, it is not so much his story as that of the life which the whole lives in him at the center. Yeah, that's wonderful. So that's the page right before the last one. You want me to go ahead and just finish out?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. This last is a note on some aspects of Christian doctrine from the point of view of this inquiry. He says, 1, the doctrine of the Trinity. Of the several interpretations of Trinitarian doctrine, one of the most notable is that which turns on the social nature of consciousness. The Father is the subject of origin of the deity's procession. The Son, his eternally begotten image of the object of his love. The Spirit is the vinculum of their mutual loving knowledge. Yet all three are of one undivided essence. Thus, God finds his only appropriate object, yet without that self-occupation and self-love which would be no more admirable in him than they are in us. 2, the doctrine of the incarnation. Christianity and embryology together imply that the Godhead was in the space of 9 months incarnate at every biological level, from the amoeboid to the simian, and was man and died again into the regions below man. In traditional language, God comes down in the Son, empties himself, dies, and descends into the realm of death and hell. And it is by virtue of this complete and perfect sacrifice that man is saved and becomes capable of union with God. For the Son, who comes down to the base of the hierarchy to die in and for us, is also born in us and rises again to the Father, taking with him many sons who are all one in him. 3, doctrines of the relationship of God, man, and the universe. Through the Son also all things were created, from the highest angelic ranks downwards, and by him they cohere and are upheld continually. And theologians have, on the whole, taught that the process of creation and upholding on the one hand and of redemption on the other are along the same lines. Further, it has been widely held that the cosmic and redemptive activity of the Son is an essential element in the life of the Trinity, which completes itself in all grades of finite beings, beings that are thus organically involved in the divine nature. The present reaction against this teaching of God's need of his universe takes the form of a renewed insistence on his absolute ineffability and independence of all creatures. A deity that in any way relies on me, that does not humble me to that dust, that is not utterly above and beyond me, can never meet my religious needs. About this, there can be no doubt that the creature, who is nothing in himself, cannot claim to have anything to offer to his creator or any contribution to make to the divine life. And if that life is born in this empty receptacle, it is certainly not because of the receptacle's worthiness. Nor can we claim even the merit of self-annihilation. It is not primarily the creature, but the creator who goes down to the lowest level of all. The small and the great are only themselves, but the smallest and the greatest are each other. It is not man, but the infinitesimal in him which contains the infinite, for he is much too godlike to tolerate God. In the middle of the hierarchy, he is furthest of all creatures from the divine extremities that meet. The last paragraph here. 4 descents then may be distinguished. 1, the internal procession of the Trinity, whereby one person is emptied of himself for the sake of the other. 2, the creation of the many-leveled universe and the maintenance of its upward and downward process. 3, the redemptive downcoming and ascension of the Son. 4, the religious life in which the worshiper, through the realization of his utter unworthiness, of his nothingness, receives the grace, the gift of God himself. Here are 4 variations on that theme of dying to live, which is the topic of this chapter. 4 ascent descents which may not be confused, but neither may they be separated. It is one word who, 1, was God and was with God, and 2, made all things, and 3, was made flesh, and 4, lighteth every man. Man.
Yeah. That was great, James. Yeah, I really thought that was kind of like that's kind of like what he's been building up to, like the entire time. Like I was talking to Shari like before we started recording. It's like, several times he's like pointed out that like if you try to hold on to even one particle as like your own possession, then you will receive nothing. Like but if you let go of you. If you completely let go of any attempt to have any possession for yourself, then you open yourself up so that you can so that you can actually receive the divine within.
Which is the hierarchy as such. You receive the entire hierarchy
It's
if
the
you let,
whole. Yeah.
yeah, if you let go of your
Whole.
little position in it.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
So, which I don't. Sherry and I have been having like a separate like discussion with Michael about Emil Bach's uh, book on the Apocalypse of Saint John, and in the section that we last discussed, he's talking about the image of the Son of Man, and like the image of the Son of Man in Revelation. It's not. It is both. It is both Christ and us. It's not. It's not. It's neither. It's not an either or. It's a both and. It is. It is an image of Christ, but it's also an image of what we can become if we let go of trying to hold on to that last particle of chattel for ourselves. I also think it's important that like it's also interesting. It's very important that Harding points out that actually that motion of can actually only be accomplished by the whole, and the best that we can hope for is participation in it. So
here's a question. Is that so? Would that then be the second coming of Christ if you have this, the whole, like all of humanity? Is that, I don't, I'm not asking for like like this and this has to happen, but okay, so what comes to my mind is that I think Jesus is talking about, it's in the Gospels where he says, you'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, right? You know the verse I'm talking about?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So well, just to finish my thought, I talked with Jacob on the Discord about that, and he pointed out that Son of Man in Aramaic is actually means humanity. So this is this Son of Man debate, right?
Right.
But in light of Harding, it's also true. It's also true, like in a both and kind of way, right? So you see Christ coming. This is the second coming, but then you also see humanity coming. Am I understanding this correctly? As in light of what Harding's talking
Well,
about?
you have the. I mean, in Revelation, you have the bride, the church responding, "Come quickly."
Mm-hmm.
So the question of like what is the Perusia is like an interesting question. I suppose like the evangelical like construal would just be like this sort of like image of like Jesus like bodily riding in the clouds. I think that's
I guess what, maybe I'll just say it more clearly. Christ is the perfect image of the invisible, right? Which is what we are, like to become. So when Christ comes, he's not coming just to us, but he's actually coming as us, as humanity in its perfect state. I guess that's what I'm asking.
right.
Yeah,
Like it just feels like. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, James.
No, I think that makes sense in the understanding of Christ as the new Adam, and the term Adam means both, the individual Adam, but it also it means in Hebrew it means humanity, right? And then Christ came as the Lamb in his incarnation, and he comes in his glory at the end, right? So he saved the individual Adam from hell, right? Adam and Eve, when he went down during the resurrection, right? So I could see it correlates nicely to humanity as a whole, right? Because Adam is both an individual and humanity. He's the new Adam. So in the end, he comes as humanity as such, in glory, right?
Yeah.
And and it put a strange twist to it in a cloud, right? What do we have all of our data in, right? In a cloud, in a sense, right? So it's in
It's
another way to think of it real quick is like, the incarnation or the death of Christ was the death of the individual. So he had to come into the world to die and be resurrected. And the church is the body, right? And the church is dying or dead in order for it to be resurrected as a whole, right? So the individual Christ died to be resurrected. And now the body of Christ, essentially, the church dies in order to be resurrected. And what that's going to look like, God only knows,
Well, so this is really kind of interesting because last night I had a very disturbing dream. I dreamt that my son and my brother both were decapitated. But the thing that stood out in the dream was that I was holding their head because that's who I know. I know them by their face, right? And I was weeping, but I couldn't fully mourn because they were not attached to their body. If that makes any sense. So they weren't whole without their body, right?
So you're saying Christ wishes to be attached to his body? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think has to be. That's the entire. That is.
I think
humanity.
that's right, and I think it's more than just. I think it's more than just humanity, though. Think because think about like if especially in light of what Harding's talking about when he's talking about like what the going down to hell like really means, and when he talks about like how the whole will not be satisfied until like it claims every last particle. Like you don't get to claim a particle for yourself. Every last particle is claimed by the whole. And it's not just and it's like Bach is talking about that, but like the Perusia is not it's not just it's the coming of Christ, but it's also like it's the joining of heaven and earth. It's the coming of the entire supersensible world, penetrating materiality fully. So there's it's not just humanity, it's everything that's being restored to God through us. And we have here's the thing, is like this is where I disagree with Harding. This is where I think Harding is wrong. It's like well, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. He's right to say that that there is no glory that we can claim for ourselves, but he is wrong to say that God has no need of us whatsoever, because it is actually through humanity that the work is accomplished.
What were you going to say about Eve, James?
Well, so Adam means, Adam means humanity. Life, Eve means life in Hebrew. So humanity and life, right? So life, as Hardin talks about, it encompasses all of Earth, right? And he actually talks about this dichotomy of humanity and life. He doesn't couch it back to Adam and Eve. But I think it's interesting to play on this fractal that, Adam is a human and humanity, Eve is Eve and life as a whole. So humanity, the humanity redeems life in a sense, right? And becomes the caretaker it was supposed to be in a sense. And
we're that mediator at the middle of the hierarchy that redeems the entire hierarchy, which is why I think it's not quite right to say that. Well, first of all, I think God, in being the whole that actually shows us this path of going down to the bottom, completely self-sacrificing, it shows that God's power is weakness and vulnerability. So there's nothing, and that's how God is revealed to us in Christ. So there's nothing contradictory to the nature of God at all to say that in some way he does have need of us. And what his need is for us to participate in that pattern, which is the self-sacrificial divine love. And it's only by our evolving participation in that pattern that the work is accomplished.
Okay, but we're talking about this in future terms, but it's also happening now, right?
Yes.
He says
I just want to be really
It's actually
careful. I
He
want to
says
be
on the-
careful about implying that, you know, Christ isn't whole without the body, and, you know, like that this is like a future event in a sense, right? Like I just somehow the present moment has to be included in all of that. So anyway, go
Well,
ahead.
Right.
Christ is the head, right? And the body is the church, right? Christ is the masculine, and the feminine is the mother of God, is the body of the church in a sense. And humanity is a mediator between the two, so between heaven and earth, and between the body and the body and the head. But this, to speak a little bit to how you're saying it's happening now. So it happens like the blooming of a rose, right, integrates the center of the galaxy, the center of the sun, the center of the earth. The whole is encompassed in the blooming of the flower of the rose. And he says, the sun has no more broken up into the solar system than the rosebud has broken up into the rose. Planets are the petals of the star in full bloom. So, it makes me this idea of worship, right? So how does a rose worship God? It blooms.
Right.
Frogs croak, birds chirp. Humans.
They live.
Yeah,
They
exactly. They live and they glorify God in a sense. And that idea of glorifying God, of worship, is fractally instantiated at every level, right? And at the
Right.
human level, it's at the same time the furthest away and the closest, because he talks about the middle human perspective being the furthest away from the superhuman and the infinitesimal. So the infinitesimal, the very low and the very high are the lowest and the greatest are closest to God. And it seems that because we're in the middle, we're the lowest, we're the furthest away. It seems to what he was saying at the end of that chapter there. But he says in another place, he talks about how marriage encompasses this idea. He says, just quickly here, he says, it is the mark of a man's life at its best that he places it in its full hierarchical setting, so that it becomes an utterly different thing, a sacrament, universal, profound. Christian marriage provides an example. The tale is first of a ceremony before God and before his angels, according to an earlier version of the marriage service, then of registration by the state, then of a family reception, then of a solitary man and woman, then of their organs, then of their cells, chromosomes, genes, till we lose track altogether of their joint downgoing to the center, where lovers at last meet and are one. And the second half of the story is the mirror image of the first, a story of their joint arising in their offspring, a cell, a swiftly evolving animal, a human child, of whom the family and the state and heaven take cognizance, and as he is registered and christened and eventually confirmed. And what is true of marriage is true of all our human acts. They are hierarchical and therefore holy, as soon as we see them as they are, vertically instead of horizontally.
And that when it's participated in well, it is a repetition of the Trinitarian image, because it is the reflection of the unity and multiplicity in polar tension that the Trinity is trying to tell us is the ground of reality. So it's like you have a multiplicity, a husband and a wife coming together to form a bond of unity, and through self-sacrificial love, like, give birth to a new creation.
Mhm.
Like, literally. And that's particularly resonant when you think about, like, when Harding talks about toward the end, when he talks about the incarnation, and he talks about how, like, when you think of, like, the actual, like, growth and development of the fetus in the womb, it actually, like, reflects every single layer of the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, entirely. So which shows how the incarnation, like, literally, like, it absolutely penetrates every layer. It unites God to every single layer of material reality. Like, there's no there's no part of it that's not claimed
Yeah,
to him by
uh,
that.
the embryo, all right, or gestation, or the coming to being of a human, is a condensation of the whole, fractally in the individual, and you can see that physically in the process of evolution that happens as the process moves forward. So I was thinking, he says at the end there, and what is true of marriage is true of all of our human acts. They are hierarchical and therefore holy. And this seems like it's determined on our perspective, right? And it makes me think that the whole is whole and holy. We are the ones that our perception of the world is fallen. So she says, as soon as we see them as they are, vertically instead of horizontally. So it's our understanding or our perception of the world that is fallen. The world in itself isn't fallen.
Well, and
Yeah.
also, horizontal hierarchies are fundamentally broken too.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
also the inability to look up, right?
Mhm.
Like James mentioned this in his introduction there to I think it was the first talk that we had that I really liked, when he said, that Harding is encouraging us to look up, right?
Mhm.
Like we're literally walking somewhere, looking on the ground, watching our feet, right? And not really looking up. So yeah.
He says in one of the chapters, he says, we are like, it made me think of the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He says, when you look up and see the stars, right, you're looking into heaven.
Mhm.
Like heaven is there. And it's that's why I think this whole idea of headlessness comes in, right? It's not that we're just looking up, is that the whole up is us. Like this whole thing that is all the stars, all the galaxies, right, is us. That's the headlessness of it. But we're focused on our body, and this part like hands and whatnot. So it's hard to make that shift. It kind of comes to me a little bit when I'm driving, where like, it's not just your gaze, it's you are all of that, like the dome, like you are heaven and earth, right? Mediating between heaven and earth. We're just focused on the bottom part of the earth, in a sense, and building things and extracting resources.
Well, it's like the sensual body, right, with all its requirements, has us nailed to the ground, in a sense, which is
Yep.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it keeps us. Yeah, definitely. Harding very much. I mean, that's kind of like he very much is. He's very much trying to let you in on the secret that that you actually do have it. Like it is open to you to 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 let go and and allow that to enter you now. Like it's not there's it's very much it's not merely a deference to like some future event.
But
So
there's
how do you?
still, yeah, there's still the so letting go. It's like this Eastern idea, like Eastern, like Asiatic idea of enlightenment as you let go, right? But what about the grace of God? How do you? Is that something you can not encourage, but you can? I guess it is something. But there's
Well,
this
this is
downward
where I
movement.
think
Yeah.
right, and this is where I think, despite his like movement toward the end of chapter 12, this is where I think Harding breaks down a little bit because he's focused a little bit too much on unity, which can lead to that sort of Eastern view. And actually, I was commenting on this earlier today. It's like he does actually he somewhat gets this. Well, I don't know if he goes far enough, because he does make it very clear that it's like you can't do that. Like you are not capable of doing the sacrifice. He does make that clear
Mhm.
in that chapter, right? So it's like there's no possibility of like of being like Odin on the world tree, a sacrifice of yourself to yourself. Like that is only something that a god or God is capable of, right? So that isn't a path that's open to you. So I would say that would like how just the idea of self-sacrifice or no self in and of itself isn't sufficient. That is because unity is insufficient, because there has to be And this is where he's a little weak. He only has like just the barest treatment of the Trinity. But to my view, it's like this is why the Trinity has to come into play, because you can't have, if you have just unity, all of reality is just the same thing. And that's not, and in what way is that, in what way is that an adequate account of reality? It's just, it becomes just a flat, it ultimately becomes a flat oneness. There is in fact no real distinction. James, Shari, Nate, those are just arbitrary labels that have no distinction, right? If there really is just unity.
Well, there's a unity, like, so there's three hypostatic persons in the Trinity.
Correct. So there has to be
Right.
that tension, that right. That
So
that
the
tension
multiplicity
between,
is preserved. The multiplicity is preserved in the
Correct.
unity instead
Right.
of subsumes itself in the unity.
in the Trinitarian model,
Yeah.
which is why it has to be a Trinitarian model. And
Mhm.
and not only that, it shows you what we know from Revelation, we know like what that unity is. I mean, John's gospel tells us that God is love. So that we actually, so we know that agapic love is the force that holds the tension between the unity and multiplicity, and allows, instead of just a flat repetition of the same flat unity throughout the entire universe, that it is agapic love and relational personhood in the image of God that allows us to have both unity and multiplicity. So I can say that you and Shari and I are all one in Christ. We have a genuine unity, right? We are all one in Christ, and at the same time, you are still James, she is still Shari, and I am still Nate. We are still, so that multiplicity is not dissolved. And I think that's the richness that you get out of the Christian view, and the Christian, which is still a non-duality.
Mhm.
There's still a oneness, right? But the multiplicity isn't dissolved. You keep
Mhm.
both.
Yeah, it's a Christian view, but it's a universal view. Like that's why Christianity is the religion that ended religions.
Correct.
It's
Yeah, I totally.
universal.
Yeah,
also-
that's right. I would say this. Here's the thing: is that universalism, that kind of universalism, literally does not become possible until Christianity. Like,
Mhm.
it is, you have to see the Christian pattern in order to see that universalism. But I agree with you; it is a universal pattern. It actually does reflect reality, and you
Mhm.
can. And now, after Christianity has entered into the scene, you can now go back and see it.
Mm.
But without a Christian frame, you wouldn't be able to see it.
And just to double click on that a bit, so if you hold to the idea, which I do, that science is born from Christianity, right? The natural philosophy, right? The tools that we've built to literally observe the heavens, telescopes, are only possible, right, through this proper astronomy is only possible through the Christian story, right? We're literally we're able to make the tools to look up, in a sense. Like, if you take it even further, right? Like science was born from Christianity, it was nested in Christianity. So the tools that were built to observe the heavens, right, were presupposed by the Christian story. So the heavens were opened up to us in a physical sense, and that's all we're focused on. But it's just something that came to me. Don't know if
Well,
it tracks.
it certainly came. I mean, certainly the scientific vision certainly came to its maturity and fullness within the Christian frame. Yeah, I mean, you have to grant um, a certain amount of that to, like, the Islamic world,
Mhm.
um, um, particularly like in like the early medieval period.
Well, that's part of the
There
Christian
was a
frame too,
flowering
right?
there. What
That's
was
part of
that?
the Christian. That's part of the Christian frame
Oh,
as well.
you're including the Judeo. So like,
Yeah.
if you say Judeo-Christian, I think you're
Well,
definitely right there.
I'm reading this book. It's the Religion of the Apostles, Orthodox Christianity in the First 100 Years, and it talks about. It's really, really, really great book, and it talks about how Christianity is situated in Second Temple Judaism, right? And the Rabbinic Judaism that is kind of anti-Christian didn't develop until the 5th and 6th century as a reaction to Christianity, and that the apostles were wholly Jewish, like they were in Christianity came to complete the Torah, didn't come to overturn it. So it's a completion of this process. And it's really fascinating to look at the worldview. And the idea is that biblical scholarship has just been tainted by this kind of historicity of the last couple hundred years, where
Right.
at Christianity, the idea is that Christ was man and God is something that evolved over time, and it took a few hundred years. And it's like, no, these ideas were rich and alive right at the time and after the time of Christ. So it's like they are all part of the same story in a
Right.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if have you read Robert Jensen's The Triune God? It's like
Mm-mm.
volume 1 of his systematic theology. I haven't finished it yet. I just started it. I've only gotten through like the introductory part of it, but he makes a very strong argument like from the Old Testament for the presence of the Trinity
Mhm.
within the Old Testament. And he's like he worked very closely with a rabbi in a lot of his work, and he always has had a very sympathetic view toward Judaism. And you're definitely, I mean, you're singing my song right now. I mean, my wife is Jewish, so um, I have a great deal of respect for the Jewish tradition. Although I'm not going to, I mean, I do read it through a Christian lens, and that's inevitably so. And I don't make any apologies for that. I don't think it's anti-Semitic or insulting. I mean, it's like, it's just, once you have that, once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. And it's just disingenuous to pretend you don't.
Mhm.
So that is how I read it. And then the other thing is like in terms of like how Jewish like the early Christians were, it's like until the Bar Kokhba revolt, that the Christians were in the synagogue still.
Mhm.
It's like the lines between Judaism and Christianity did not become as bright as they are now until a lot later in history than most people realize. Like it really wasn't until like you see the beginnings of this like in about the 3rd century when you start seeing this concern with heresy in both the Jewish and the Christian camp, and it kind of evolves from there. But then in the early days, that was not a that wasn't a, that was a very blurry line, a very blurry line. And certainly I would say if you broaden it out to the Judeo-Christian view, then I think for sure you can say that um, science is born out of that for sure,
Yeah. So
for sure.
if it's interesting to think, right? So Judaism was very specific for Israel, right? It's very specific for a time and a place and the people, right? And Christ came and so God revealed himself to a certain people in time and space, right? And that was
Right,
Israel in the whole Old Testament. That process of the revelation of God, right, was made universal through Christ's incarnation. The ass and the donkey and the icon of Jesus's birth, right, represents the Gentiles and the Jews. And
yeah,
it's like this wedding of the revelation of God initially to Moses, right, through Jesus to the rest of the world. So it really is a universal kind of proclamation, a cosmic proclamation in a sense, because through that process we were able to observe the cosmos years later,
right.
like literally physically. But there's really no distinction. I mean, the distinction between the physical and the spiritual is arbitrary, and it's we're hyper focused on the physical, so it looks like it's bad or whatnot. But you know what I'm saying, it's 50% of the equation. It's just we're hyper focused on it now, so it's hard to think of them as both as important.
Yeah, we see we've come to like it in with our subject object dualism post Descartes. We've like essentially we've come to see everything as an object. And now,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason we're in crisis now is that we've come to even see ourselves as an object. So we've
Mm-hmm.
sucked all the, we've progressively sucked all the subjectivity out of everything. And I think like you see even now, like there's some signs of like even in the sciences, like you have ideas like panpsychism, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
see like the subjectivity like starting to like seep back into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
So and yeah, so
John Vervaeke has this a term that he coined called transjective. So you have the subjective and the objective, and then the transjective, which is like the space above it, or the integration of the two, in a sense. I think it's an interesting term. I think that it's interesting when Pajot talks about attention a lot. Like, I was watching Jordan Peterson had a talk with Ian McGilchrist, and he was talking about how attention is how we bring being into the world. And I forgot exactly how he phrased it, but that'll get us on another tangent. I had a question about Revelation that I can't think of. I think my brain's fried a bit here. Maybe it'll come to me again.
Well, just listening to you guys talking about this scientism, as Barfield calls it, it seems to me, because we were talking before, Harding is talking about, possessing that one thing, right? And if you hang on to it, you don't enter the kingdom. And I think, understanding the cosmos, I think ancient man did understand the cosmos. I mean, the three wise men showed up at the birth of Christ, right? Because they understood the cosmos. But what happened with the Christianizing of it all is that they wanted to possess it, right? They wanted to own it. And I mean, we see that even more today than ever. Now they want to go inhabit Mars, right? And what do they call that process where they, turn it into a green planet? They got all the details worked out. They're going to own it, and if they ever get there, the next fight will be over Mars and all the pieces of Mars that, everyone wants to own, right? And, when Nate was talking about, this letting go, my question is, well, what does that look like? What does letting go look like? How do you let go of, we hang on to all kinds of things. We hang on to our identity, we hang on to our spouse, we hang on to our children, we hang on to our property, our belongings, our clothes. So what is letting go, And I don't know what you guys think of that, but what iota, what little thing could you still be holding on to? What is that thing? Because I mean, we can let go of our possessions. When it comes to dying, I think when someone is dying, they're not thinking about their bank account and what they're leaving behind. They're focused on dying. They're ready to go, right? What is that thing they're holding on to?
Are you suggesting that everyone finally does let go, in that moment of death?
No,
you don't think they do? Okay.
No, I'm wondering what is it that they're hanging on to? What is that thing?
They say let go or be dragged. That's that statement? Let go or be dragged. That's a good question.
I'm actually thinking of something specifically. I'm going to read it. It's a scene out of the book Lilith by George MacDonald.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't identify the thing either. Okay. So I just wondered if you had some ideas, but I'll read this because.
Well, I think it's different. The reason he doesn't identify it depends. It's going to be a different thing for every person, right? So what I want to hold on to is not going to be the same thing that Shari wants to hold on to. It's not going to be the same thing that James wants to hold on to. So there is no one answer for it, because the thing that you're tempted to hold on to is going to be different than the thing that I'm tempted to hold on to. The point is that whatever it is,
Okay.
and then it's really, and it's hardest, I'm gonna let you read from Lilith, but it actually is hardest when the thing that we're clinging on to is something that is a good to some degree, right? But it might be a good that we're making the good when it's just a good.
Well, it's always a good because it's preserving your life.
You're getting into Privatio Boni here, but yes, that's exactly right. It's always a good that we're. So it's not like that we're trying to hold on to something that isn't a good. It's just not the good, and whatever that thing is going to be different.
It's the holding on that's not good, right? Like this root of addiction, right? It's good that when you're using drugs, they work, right, temporarily, but they give you that satisfaction. Terrence McKenna says human beings are the beings that addict. right? We get addicted to whatever it is. And I think, to speak to your point, Nate, like, it's different for everybody, whether it's sex or drugs or working out or alcohol or whatever it is. It's this addiction that I think is this like the acute part of holding on, in a sense, but before you read, Christ says, sell all your stuff and follow me. Right.
Mhm.
So and just lastly, it's like, if you give up that thing that you're holding onto, you become so much more. You become the whole. Right?
Yeah.
It's you're grasping onto this but your identity is preserved. That's where you have to trust and have faith that will
That-
happen.
and
That's the hard
ultimately,
part, I
that
think.
is what you have to give
Yeah.
up, is the last shred that you can. I'm glad you said identity, because that's really what it's about. You need to let go of. You need to let go of the question that Harding begins the book with, and he's pointing to the answer too, right? The answer is you're nothing.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So quit
Yet
trying
everything.
to get everything, exactly, and only by accepting the fact that ultimately you are nothing. You are a contingent. You are a contingent being who only is preserved in existence by participating in God. That's the only way that you will ever become anything more than nothing.
Well, when we talked about the letting go, James asked or touched on, what about the grace of God in all of that, right? Letting go, and what is the grace of God in that situation? How does it operate? What does it look like? And that's what made me think about this passage out of Lilith, because it's such a good example of both of those things at the same time.
All right.
I mean, I don't have to read it, but
No, you need to
No, read it.
go ahead,
Please,
read it.
please
Please read it.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm always in favor of reading McDonald.
okay. Okay. So Lilith is the antagonist in the story, and Mara is the daughter of Adam. And they finally tamed Lilith to the point that she's willing to go to sleep. I don't want to tell the whole story, but just for a context, okay? And going to sleep is what gets you into the after,
Yeah.
the rest of your life, right?
Sleep is an obvious image of
Yeah.
death.
Right.
So
So, okay, so Lilith, said Mara, you will not sleep if you lie there 1,000 years until you have opened your hand and yielded that which is not yours to give or to withhold. I cannot, she answered. I would if I could, and gladly, for I am weary, and the shadows of death are gathering about me. They will gather and gather, but they cannot enfold you while yet your hand remains unopened. You may think you are dead, but it will be only a dream. You may think you have come awake, but it will still be only a dream. Open your hand, and you will sleep indeed, then wake indeed. I am trying hard, but the fingers have grown together and into the palm. I pray you put forth the strength of your will for the love of life. Draw together your forces and break its bonds. I have struggled in vain. I can do no more. I am very weary, and the sleep lies heavy upon my lids. The moment you open your hand, you will sleep. Open it and make an end. A tinge of color arose in the parchment-like face. The contorted hand trembled with agonized effort. Mara took it and sought to aid her. Hold, Mara, cried her father. There is danger. This is Adam, the new Adam. The princess turned her eyes upon Eve beseechingly. There was a sword I once saw in your husband's hands, she murmured. I fled when I saw it. I heard him who bore it say it would divide whatever was not one and indivisible. I have the sword, said Adam. The angel gave it me when he left the gate. Bring it, Adam, pleaded Lilith, and cut me off this hand that I may sleep. I will, he answered. He gave the candle to Eve and went. The princess closed her eyes. In a few minutes, Adam returned with an ancient weapon in his hand. The scabbard looked like vellum grown dark with years, but the hilt shone like gold that nothing could tarnish. He drew out the blade. It flashed like a pale blue northern streamer, and the light of it made the princess open her eyes. She saw the sword, shuddered, and held out her hand. Adam took it. The sword gleamed once. There was one little gush of blood, and he laid the severed hand in Mara's lap. Lilith had given one moan and was already fast asleep. Mara covered the arm with the sheet, and the three turned away. Will you not dress the wound, I said. A wound from that sword, answered Adam, needs no dressing. It is healing and not hurt.
Mm.
Poor lady, I said, she will wake with but one hand. Where the dead deformity clung, replied Mara, the true lovely hand is already growing.
Mm.
But I thought of it because when you were asking about grace, I thought that of the sword.
Right.
You got to meet halfway though. Like in a crude example is an addict that goes to, an addict has to hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
Right? Eventually has to stop, right? And in doing so, then he can wake up. Then he can beat his addiction. And I dealt with addiction my life, and I remember when I was addicted to opiates, there was a time where I took them for a while, and I stopped taking them, and it just went through a hellish situation for a prolonged hell, and that stuck with me, and that's what started the addiction. And I was talking to a priest about this, and we were talking about it. It's like that is the demon actually is that memory of it, where you're scared to let go of whatever the addiction is, in a sense, because you're afraid of this memory of it. But if you have to have faith and trust, and if you do that, then you'll God will meet you halfway, and you'll get the grace. But you have to make the leap.
Right, right. Which is what Lilith was doing.
Because you have free will, right? Yeah. And then and then that thing that you're most afraid of losing is what will give you your life back, in a sense. But it's one thing to intellectually describe it, or even beautifully, like you just read there, but to go through it personally, which everybody does in some sense. Nobody can explain it to you, no matter how good they are with words, when you're facing with it yourself. It's the whole, when Moses put up the snakes, right? Those that looked at the snakes were healed, and those that turned away stayed sick. So you got to look at the snake. The snake is the serpent in a sense. It's like the pharmakon in Greek. Pharmakon means poison and remedy, in a sense, right? So yeah, it's a very personal thing how that, I think, manifests in every individual's life. But the story,
yeah, and then, I mean, in the part that I read there, Lilith saw the sword and she shuddered.
Mm-hmm.
She was terrified, right?
Yeah, snakes are terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For something you said something in what you're talking about. This might seem like a tangent, for whatever reason. When you were talking about what you're talking about, James, you talked about like free will, and you brought up freedom, and I wanted to just bring this back to the Trinity one more time, because you actually can't have either freedom or love if reality is just a unity.
Mm-hmm.
Because neither freedom nor love have any meaning.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be more than one. It has to be more than just a simple unity for either love or freedom to have any meaning whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, that is the image that we have of Christ being the head and us being the body, right? Is unity and multiplicity. I mean, that's how.
Right.
That is the image.
Right.
Of
right.
the complete.
Right.
Human being.
Right. Yes, that's right. Which it's just that's what and I think that's what the pattern is. It's unity and multiplicity. It's unity, multiplicity, love, and freedom.
Yeah.
Like those are the concepts. That is the pattern that holds everything together.
You think that maps onto the good, the true, and the beautiful? Like, I know that they understand the numerical 1, 2, 3. Like 1 is unity, 2 is multiplicity, 3 is the unity in multiplicity, and vice versa. So yeah, the whole, but the whole that preserves the parts, right? The parts glorify the whole, in a sense. And then the good, the true, and the beautiful. Does that map on where the unity and the multiplicity is the beautiful, right? The multiplicity is the good and the one is the true. Does it map on there, you think?
I think I mean, it's certainly. What are you trying to map them to? The good. What are you trying to map them to exactly
Well,
again?
like you think about the first person, second person, and third person. First
Oh, you're
person
trying to
is
map them onto.
individual.
I think they actually. I would say that all three persons participate in
all three.
all
All
three.
three
Yeah.
transcendent.
Yeah. And I would see this. Yeah, for sure.
So could you say that the true is the individual, right? Right now, as Hardin couches it, we're living solely through the true, the scientific inquiry in a sense, right? The good would be, the other, right? Good, humanism, right? Is a reflection of the good.
Right.
And then the beautiful is the totality, the beatific vision.
Right.
Does that map on, you think, to the first person perspective, second person perspective, and then third person perspective, the subjective, intersubjective, and objective, right? All three are necessary, and we become hyper focused on one to the detriment of the others, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just
right. And then you also have the question of like, well, where does love enter into that picture? Like, what is the connection? Like, is love also as transcendental? Like,
yeah.
we know from John's gospel tells us that God is love. So what does that mean, and what is the connection?
So love is the unity and the multiplicity, right? That unifies the three.
There
right?
you go.
It has to be love, doesn't it? Agape.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it's the thing that it's always the unifying.
Mm-hmm.
Love is the thing that unifies. Like, I think that's just like.
Yeah.
Which is why it's like that's why it's like there's scripture never says that God is beauty or God is truth or God is good. Well, it says God is good, but it doesn't say God is goodness, right? So it's like it's God is love. That's the thing that like gets associated with God's essence.
Mm-hmm.
And
but it's not the emotion of love. It is the emotion.
And the essence of a thing is the unity of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the unity of God is love. That's really what, when you say something is something, you're saying this is the source of the unity of that thing.
Mm-hmm. And if you think you can't know God, its essence, you can only know him by his energies, right? So if God is love, then his energies would be agape.
Right. Well, they would be
the action of love.
Yeah. Okay. So an action of love is only manifest in relationship.
That's right.
Right.
But
so I didn't know we were doing chapters 9 to 12 today, and I was reading 7, 8, and 9, and I came across this. It's on page 84, in the middle of the page, where he says, in fact, however, the elbow room that creatures enjoy, their mobility, the interpenetration of their habits, all make not for less organization in life's body, but for more. Life's interspaces are room for the weaving of an unimaginably complex web of mutual dependence, in which all the threads hang together in the total pattern. It is precisely because life's structure is so little rigid that its parts are so much and so variously involved in the whole. Pluck the bee from the flower and you have neither. No creature or species or genus makes sense in form or function without the rest. From the very start, nothing less than life itself has ever lived. And when I read that, I thought of...
Because the relations are the reality.
Right, and I thought about Indra's net. I think it was a David Bentley Hart conversation, and he talked about this, and it really stood out to me, where he said, the cool thing about Indra's net is that every one of those places where the net connects are jewels. Right, like they reflect each other into infinity, right? Each jewel reflects the next jewel on and into infinity. And I think actually McGilchrist makes a reference to Indra's net too, as being like the perfect image of, well, dare I say, space-time.
Right.
It's because it's relationship, right? Everything in relationship to the other. But when you look at Indra's net, you see a net, and it's actually those jewels that make it anything. Without them, those are the connection points, right? Without them, there's nothing. It's just
Right.
a bunch of threads.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
that, like, it made me think of the neurons in the brain, right? Them all, the network of your brain, like when it all fires together, you have your identity, right? If there's parts that aren't working, you know, your identity isn't at least physically manifesting appropriately. That made me think, like, what is the internet then? Like, what is this, one of those jewels? Like, not this specific conversation, but coming together through this vast network of, you know, interweaved network of fibers, it allows this conversation to happen, which is a node in the network, right? Is I think we need to start thinking about the internet and these things that seem completely demonic right now as the solution in a weird way.
No, I think you're right because you're yes because anything that has a potential for that has a potential for as much evil as has the internet has proven to be at this point also has to have a great potential for good. I mean, that's just like that's we know this like the that's almost like a that's almost just that's almost that's so obvious it's basically a tautology. Like if that which has more potential for evil also has more potential for good.
Well,
And
that's what James just referenced, and I can't remember how you put it, James, but you said something that reminded me of, you know, like every blessing is also a curse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah, it depends on how. Like, I wouldn't have become personally a Christian again if it wasn't for the internet.
right,
yeah,
It just wouldn't have happened.
yeah.
right, yeah,
So
I think I could say the same thing.
yeah,
I could definitely say the same thing. Like it
and I
was
think
like
that's happening everywhere too. Yeah, you
because
know.
it's like in fact I could chase the I could actually demonstrate the chain that led to me returning to Christianity through the internet. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I started by like joining the fans of David Bentley Hart Facebook page and started reading David Bentley Hart. I saw Jordan Peterson like helped me reconstruct my idea of what faith is. That was
Mm-hmm.
through the internet. I found out about Mark Vernon's book on Owen Barfield through the fans of David Bentley Hart Facebook page. So it's all a bunch of internet connections. So yes, obviously that's the case. And that and I think that's what this is what I see. I mean, this is what our times look like to me. It's like there's like well, first of all, I see like obvious evidence that the where people are starting to see the spiritual world again.
Mm-hmm.
Like materiality is breaking down and and vision of the spiritual world and enchantment are breaking through, which is leading to both more darkness and more light, like simultaneously, which is
If you take
exactly what
that,
you would
yeah.
expect.
If you take
Well,
that in terms of the apocalyptic vision where demons and angels would start fighting each other, right? Demons are pouring in, but I have a wall of saints all of a sudden. Like, I'll buy an icon, I'll start reading a saint, and I'll build a relationship with him. And all of a sudden
Yeah.
he's on my wall, you know, and another one pops up, and these icons of saints, they're pouring in too, right? So the saints are pouring in, the demons are, and there's a war going on in a sense.
saints are marching in.
You know, and it's like it seems crazy to think that this is an expression of the end times. You know, you're seeing Wiccan and you know, neo-paganism and all of these old religions popping up as well. You know, and it's kind of crazy.
Well,
I,
that's also in this Emil book conversation that we're having. Is he talks about the apocalypse as not time time is not so much linear in the sense that we're getting closer to the end of it. It's more, it's like an energy that becomes more, what's the word that he uses, Nate? It's pressing,
yes, it's
Condensed.
depressing.
more urgent,
Yeah, the
right? More
urgency of
condensed.
yeah.
Yeah.
He actually demonstrates this through the way like as you go from seal to seal and trumpet to trumpet and vial of wrath to vial of wrath, that actually you notice that each one gets longer than the previous one. So one through six, it gets progressively longer. Like it takes up more actual physical space on the page to describe each one as it. So it's kind of, you can see the successive building, and then the six just kind of like enfolds directly into the seventh.
Mm-hmm.
in each
And
case.
and seven is also the is representative of time. The number seven,
The fullness of time.
fullness of time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And time is speeding up now, right? Just time is like synchronicities, like time is speeding up. And I had this idea. I've talked with a lot of people. I've had these conversations on my channel, and so many in so many different places have all of a sudden in the last 2 years become Orthodox or Catholic, mostly
Yeah.
Orthodox just because of the people I've been talking to. But
Right.
I talked to this one young man, 26 years old, and it was like talking to an elder. I'm like, whoa. And he just became Catholic. He schooled me on the rosary and like just the deepness of the rosary and kind of praying the joys and, you know, so much there. And so many young people this is happening to. I had this idea that I saw this in my own life. The whole history of the world is happening to each individual, because I went from
Yes.
you know, philosophically minded, then all of a sudden I was into pagan stuff and qigong and like Taoism, and then I got into crystals, right? It's like the whole process of the logos manifesting in the world is happening in each individual rapidly now. Like the whole process of the coming, you know, of logos being seeded and then coming into its full effect.
We're
is
just all
happening.
going through
Yeah.
the process of seeing how like Christ enters into every part.
Yeah, and
So,
that's
so it's just progressive. What it is, it's a progressive revelation of Christ.
well, that's
Because there's
interesting.
some little bit of Christ in all those things.
Yeah.
Like he's
Imagine, yeah.
there's nothing he doesn't touch.
Yeah. Imagine 10 years ago, all three of us just flashing back 10 years ago and then watching ourselves have this conversation with each other. You'd be like,
I'd have been
what?
like, what are you talking
is-
about?
The world did end in 2012. They'd look, what am I doing? Like, oh my God.
Oh,
But you know
man.
what you said there, James, about the logos, about you living the entire history of the world. I thought that was
I
really
love
great,
that.
because
I love that, James.
I feel it, you know?
yeah, but
That is so
it's again
so
that
right.
that
Yeah.
fractal nature of reality, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's all around you.
It shows.
It's
It
those
also
giant concentric circles, but it's also happening inside of you at the same
Mhm.
time.
right, and it shows
Yeah.
this growing sense. Like this actually like meets up really well. What I was talking about, how like the sense of like the spiritual world has become, which when that happens, you also start to see the interconnectedness of things more too, which makes total sense why you would feel like you're living the whole history of the world.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you know, it's interesting, like there's parts where like Harding talks about how our like our consciousness actually like kind of like is he connects it to like how it kind of like makes alive the dead eras of the past, right? Like before like before human consciousness like even evolved. Like we're bringing all of that, we're bringing all of that deadness into life through us, through
Mhm.
our conscious experience. And he talks about like when we look up into the stars, right? You know, even though we might think of even though, you know, from our modernist frame we might think of a distant galaxy as just like a collection of, you know, inert fiery gas balls, but our consciousness, like contemplating those things, like actually brings them into participation of the life of the whole.
And just on that, Hardin talks about how when we go to church, all of that is going to church, and we don't go to
Yes,
church.
I love that line.
I
Yeah,
was trying to
right.
find
Yes.
it. I couldn't find it.
Like,
He's like,
I mean, he's like,
yeah,
he's like the true church is a cosmic church.
yeah.
Yeah,
I couldn't find it. I didn't. I'm like,
yeah.
I think it was
It's
106.
in chapter 12, I think.
Might have been
Uh,
106.
let's see. It's it's in the no, it's in chapter 11. It's in the galactic view. Oh, here, this is actually not okay. This isn't that quote, but this is another great one. I love this too. So he talks about how like the more we view things as dead, the actually more life we're actually bringing to them, right? It's like this is irony. So here's this great line where he says, he compares us to leaves on a tree, like leaves on a tree calling the tree dead. And he says, to us leaves, our Yggdrasil tree is dead because it is so obviously not a leaf. Let us wake from this dream, which makes our little life the model and touchstone of all life. Let us consider whether the constitution of stars and galaxies does not in fact fit them to be living creatures of a very exalted hierarchical status. But I it's somewhere in this chapter where the line you were talking about is about the cosmic church, but it made me think of Teilhard de Chardin's Mass on the World,
This,
where
this
where he talks about like the uh like like the Eucharist being like a symbol of the entire cosmos.
when James was talking about, the living the whole history of the world in his own lifetime, I thought of this where it's on page 97. He says, it is of the very nature of mind to bring the remote in time to awareness and intention. For what is intended is never merely present. The case is not merely that a little consciousness goes a long way, but that its status advances as it goes. And if it does not go any way at all, it does not exist. And this rule applies to every hierarchical level. The senseless evolutions of my atoms, the growth of the embryo innocent of physiology, primitive species with no idea that they were making for man, these grow up into an awareness now that is all the more theirs for being held at arm's length. The law of elsewareness rules that present mind is the correction of past and future mindlessness.
Yes, that's what I was talking about. That right there.
To be wholly aware now would be to bring every other moment, but this moment, to awareness.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting it's interesting that he keeps the this moment as elusive, and I because to me it's like that is like that's the part that that we still have to wait on, because
that's the part that we can, that's the part that is dynamic, I think.
Right. But I'm saying, but that the moment to me, like the moment itself, like the idea of the moment, the now is connected to eternity. It's connected it's connected to being and not becoming. That's why it's elusive to us.
Right.
Because although the spiritual world is approaching, and from the point of view of being, it's already happened, right? But within the realm of becoming, it's still a future event. But once it's arrived in total, then time becomes as open as space, right? So we already, when we contemplate space, when we just our abstract idea of space, when we think of space, we think of like a boundaryless openness. But when we think of time in the realm of becoming, it's a succession of events. Like, it has like it basically it's tensed, past, present, future. It has a narrative structure, beginning, middle, end. But once being has fully entered into becoming, once heaven has met earth, then time also becomes the same sort of bounded openness.
Yeah, it's it's kind of a both and thing. Yeah, that's an interesting concept there. It's like time crowns space, like they invert almost, in a sense. Yeah, I think there's
and also I was thinking about this. I was watching one of Burn Power's videos, and this was actually, it was a bit of a non sequitur from what he was actually talking about. He was actually talking about tourism and how in the past people would like go to the same little place year after year and like fully explore it, so it became fully known to them. And it was like, and because I was thinking about that smallness of space, I was actually thinking about Eden. And Eden, although Adam walks in the garden with God, right? So Eden has this connection. It has this connection to eternity, which is why Orthodox Jews like refer to the afterlife as Gan Eden, right? Garden of Eden. It's like, so there's this intuitive connection between Eden and eternity. but Eden is actually spatially very limited. So after the fall, space opens up to us in comparison to what we had in Eden. So space is now fully open. We've gained the knowledge of good and evil, and space fully opens to us. But we've lost connection with that eternity, with that time as bound. We don't have time as bounded openness anymore.
Well,
now we become doomed to die and to live in this linear progression of tense time.
What's interesting there, Nate, I think, is that, you know, okay, I'm just gonna freewheel here for a minute, but you know, the Garden of Eden is where Adam and Eve walked with God, right? So they were living in the moment.
Correct.
Like, we think of them as living in the moment. We think of them as children,
right?
Not thinking about their future, not thinking about consequences.
And we intuitively know, like, I don't think there's a single human alive who doesn't intuitively understand that there is a connection between the moment, which is ever elusive to us. We can never actually pin it down, right? We can never pin the moment down, because the minute we think we have it pinned down, it's already passed away. It's gone into the past, and then we're moving toward the future. So it's ever elusive to us. And we have this intuitive sense that elusive moment is in fact connected to eternity. That eternity is an eternal now.
The idea that you had about the space opening up is kind of interesting, because it reminds me of John Vervaeke's idea of relevance realization. Because the first thing that God says is, you're going to have to toil, right? You're going to have to work the land, and you're going to have to deal with thorns, and you're going to have children, and you're going to have pain. What does that mean? Well, that means that suddenly all this stuff becomes relevant, right? And then you realize that it's there, right? You're skipping around in the Garden of Eden talking to God, and all that stuff is there, but it's not relevant to you until you're cast out into it, and then it becomes relevant. And then what happens is suddenly your space opens up. You know the feeling you get when you have some kind of daunting task? Imagine some farmer in Switzerland having to scythe the whole field with a hand scythe. You know, he might be disgruntled because he got a very small plot of land. But then when he walks out there with the scythe, suddenly it's grown vast, right?
Right. But at the same time, look how miserly we've grown with time. We're like obsessed with it. It's like, it's what we, it's how we, it's our time is what we exchange for money, right? Like, and we're always trying, we want to extend, we know our time is limited, so we want to extend it as much as possible. And we think very carefully about what we want to spend our time on. And we become very, like, jealous. I mean, we become very zealous about guarding it. Like, we don't want to let go of any moment of it.
That's the holding on, right?
Well,
I think so. Yeah, the time is the thing that we're ultimately all of us holding on to.
That's when Jesus says, if you save your life, you will lose it, right? Like, if you're trying to preserve your life, that breath that God gave you, then you will lose it, right? But what I find interesting about what I was just saying, and this is in connection to a conversation I had with Nate earlier, is that you're actually creating a space, Nate. I'm going to say that again. Right. You go out and you have a relationship to something, and within that relationship you create a space, right? Right. I think that's right, actually.
Well, and also it also, like, to tie back into it again too. It's like one of the sure signs of the fact that you really love someone is your willingness to give them your time.
Oh yeah, and time stands still when you're together.
Right. Yes. Right. When you're together with someone with someone you truly love, time can seem to stand still. Yeah, exactly.
Or you're doing something like Vervaeke talks, being in the flow state.
Right. Yep.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, the eternity is timelessness. Right.
Yeah.
We fell out of timelessness into time.
and we
Mhm.
feel the sense of time stopping when we're in those flow states too. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, like I say, it's like it's pretty much a universal intuition that like whatever eternity is, it's related to this thing that we get these glimpses of, these tastes of, that we just want more of.
Yeah. We're holding on to the finite in when the infinite, in spite of the infinite.
Right.
Heidegger wrote his work Being in Time, right? And essentially being is time in that sense, right? And the Garden of Eden was on a mountain, right? It was on the top of a mountain, right? And we
Yeah.
fell to the bottom where the thorns are, right? Where we have all of a sudden have to worry about the physical reality. It's like if you're just dropped in the woods, like naked and afraid, versus like going on a camping trip, right? If you're going on a camping trip, you're not focused. You're focused on, cooking and telling stories. But all of a sudden, if you're dropped in the woods or get lost, all of a sudden, you're what becomes relevant to you is way different than going camping with your family, in a sense. And
Yeah, and Peterson talks about it in relationship to a car in one of his lectures. He says, you drive around in a car and everything, you never think about the car. You're just thinking about where you're going in the car.
Mhm.
And then suddenly the car breaks down and everything about that car becomes relevant.
That's what Heidegger talks about, the two ways of being in the world. One is ready to hand, like a tool. You don't think of a tool. If you're using a hammer, you're goal oriented. You're thinking about building the house in a sense, right? The only time you think about the hammer is if it breaks, then all of a sudden it comes into consciousness, right? So relevance is what we invest our attention into, in a sense. And it goes back to attention in a sense.
Yeah.
It's like what the quality, like what you invest your attention into is what you invest your being into, right? And it's what you invest your attention into has to do with your values. What you value, you pay. Like we've had this conversation for an hour and a half, right? So we value this conversation, so we invest our attention into it, in a sense. There's so many things pulling our attention and fragmenting in so many ways. Thank God we are able to do this.
Well, and and Jesus like shows us through this through some through a lot of his parables too. And it's like, in as much as we can bring our attention to the moment, the closer we are to eternity.
Yeah. And you know what? It just dawned on me that when you kiss an icon, you are in the moment.
Mm.
You are there, right? Like I've really started to practice doing that, is kissing my icons. And I don't even know how to explain how that makes me feel. But one thing I do is everything about what I'm doing becomes absolutely real right then, when I kiss the icon. And,
No,
and it's also become a necessary part of my daily experience, because I can walk past the icon, I can cross myself when I see the icon, but I'm not there until I kiss that icon, which is really interesting to me. Just talking about, when you love somebody and you're with them, how time can stand still. Like you're in that now moment, right? Like you're making an embodied move towards something that you love. And yeah, just all the stuff we've just been talking about, you enter into this moment of timelessness, right?
and like something happens to you in that too. Like you're like you can feel yourself opening up.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
like yeah, that's the best way I have to describe it. You can feel yourself opening up in that moment. Like I was like earlier today, I don't know if you saw the little clip I showed. I was having a conversation about on the Voxer thread about the feminine within the divine, and I shared a little clip from the Song of Bernadette, which is an old like movie from the 40s about about Lourdes, and like what the Virgin told um, Saint Bernadette was, she, she said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." So, and then like the priest was like grilling her in the scene, the clip that I showed, and he's like, you know, basically saying like, that can't be right. You must be lying, because that would be like saying, I am motherhood, I am birth. And then after I shared that clip, I was just like listening to this, like to this hymn to the Immaculate Conception, and I started weeping. I was just like I was like fully in that moment. Like I was fully opened up in that moment. So I can completely relate to what you're talking
Well,
about.
that's an experience of the timeless in time, because timelessness,
Yes.
like, so it's not, you're experiencing the timeless in that moment, you know, in your time. So when time stands still, it's because everything exists, you know what I'm saying? Being exists in a sense, right? And where our consciousness is in this past, present, future. So when you kiss the timeless, when you know, in time is when that happens. It's like,
It's
you know,
it's
so
being and
opening
becoming
up.
touching.
Yeah.
Which is why I know Pacho hates it, but that's why I don't hate the image on the Sistine Chapel with like Adam and God, like the finger touching. I know he's triggered by it, whatever, but that's what that is. Like that's a representation of being and becoming touching in that
Yeah.
moment.
Did you see he just released a video? The Vatican released a picture of that process of that picture with gloves on. Did you see that?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
That was creepy. I understand him being creeped out by that. But he
yeah,
has a problem with the original image too.
yeah,
It's like, you know, yeah, I mean, yeah, I get it, you know, the whole, you know, bearded, you know, Saturn image of God the Father, but you know what? It's like, take your own self seriously.
right,
Like,
yeah,
you either believe that Christianity took all that pagan imagery and absorbed it, or you don't. So it's like you can't have it both ways.
hmm,
So I mean, we all understand what that's representing, and it is moving to see that image of like the touching of being and becoming, the coming together of you know um of time and eternity.
hmm.
So yeah, so
Yeah, man. I think we could leave it there, guys.
yeah, I
This
think
was
that's a great, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Thanks so
great.
much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Me
Yeah,
too.
me too.
And
Always
I think
do.
yeah, I think we'll do it again for the next section. I think we're up to, I think, the
Yeah, we're
last
up to
section.
chapter 13. Lucky 13 is our
Okay,
next
Yeah.
let me get this straight then. So we're doing 13 to what?
That's part 3, so that's where it
Part
starts.
three. Oh, part 3.
Yeah, part 3 is
Let me just go ahead and
chapter.
stop it
Yeah.
right here, and then we can discuss the logistics.
Yeah.